So, Barry, thank you again for being a guest on this podcast, Therapy for Guys, for the second time. It's awesome to connect with you. I always enjoy reading all your Instagram posts and following uh, Situation is Jesus, which I think you restarted, which I'm so happy about. And I'm hoping we can kind
Yeah,
of get into that.
yeah. Well, yeah, it's good to be back again. And yes, I did kick off. I don't know. You know, you start something, you think it's no big deal, and I mean, it was just a fun kind of project, and I felt like I'd kind of boxed myself into a corner, where it was
Mm.
like I was starting to get like, oh my God, I've got to think of something really cool to say today, because. And then I was like, maybe I don't. Maybe I just need to take a break for a while. And I kind of threw it out there to see if anybody else would pick it up.
Yeah.
But, but then, and it was really kind of bizarre because I kicked it back off, and suddenly, I mean, I picked up more followers in one day than I think I have in my entire sort of Instagram life in the regular world. It was like ridiculous.
Wow,
And
that's fucking crazy. I wonder why that is. Do you think it speaks to the times we're in, or do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think on one level it was just. I mean, my goal was really kind of simple. I just wanted to throw out these kind of thought bombs, memes, whatever,
Mm.
and give people something to think about without offering any opinion on them, because
Mm.
there's a lot of stuff out there, but usually things get you know coded by somebody. And I used to have people that would ask me, well, what do you mean by that? And I'm like, I don't mean anything by it.
Mm.
It's what do you think? What do you think about it? You know what I mean? So, and
Yeah.
I was really, I I started it because I've been fascinated with the situationists for a long time. Do you know about the
You
situationists?
know,
I mean,
I
I figure
don't.
you do.
No, no, I actually don't, and that's where I was hoping you would start is just by yeah, kind of telling us what that's about
So,
and how that inspired the project.
well, there was this group that started in the middle of the 1950s, called the Situationist International,
Mm.
and it was a very short-lived group, basically of artists, poets, and kind of intellectuals who were essentially very concerned about um, the the shift in like capitalist culture towards consumption of objects
Okay.
rather rather than kind of engagement with life. And I mean, probably one of the most famous of the situationists was Guy Debord, who wrote that book, The Society of the Spectacle,
Mm.
which was very influential on a lot of kind of postmodern thinking and media ideas and stuff like that. And they had a very interesting. So they their whole thing was to create what they called situations.
Sure.
And what they did is they played with existing media. So they would, for instance, they would reconfigure a comic book and put political statements in the mouths of comic characters,
Yeah.
and then put that comic book back in a shop without saying anything. So when someone bought their favorite cartoon book, they take it home, and all of the usual dialogue, the jokes and stuff, had been replaced with their kind of political or anti-capitalist or whatever their theoretical grid. And so you get this, you'd buy a cartoon and you take it home, and suddenly it was turned into something else. So they were big into this idea called détournement, which was to take one thing and to turn it into something else.
Got it.
And so I had this. Somebody gave me this set of cartoon New Testament things. In fact, I can reach it. Hold on, I should have got it
Sure.
out. But it was somebody gave it to me when I lived in California. It's called the Picture Bible,
Oh, okay.
and it's like a total like late 60s 70s Jesus movement thing, and it's
Sure.
Genesis to Revelation in picture strip form, and then it says dramatic authentic. And on the front cover, it's like that's Noah's Ark. You know what I mean? So it was
Yeah.
part of that whole sort of Jesus movement thing where they were trying to make, so this one's called the church. It's got
Mm.
all this stuff, and this one's got like Jesus, and it's all these cartoons, and so there was this one image, and I decided to take this image. So it's an image, I think, from Galatians or something, but or whatever. Jesus is talking. It's not from Galatians, it's from the Gospels, and he's talking to the Pharisees, and all they say is "shut up." And I can't remember
Mm.
what the original thing was. So what I did was I kind of traced it, because I was like, well, I'm gonna use it, but I'm gonna make it mine. So
Yeah.
I traced it out, and then because I just thought, well, I've spent, you know, three three decades or more dealing with religion in various ways,
Sure.
and it just occurred to me that people are always putting words in Jesus's mouth, like
Mm.
their opinion. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to do a little situationist action here, and I'm just going to put words in Jesus's mouth, but I'm going to put sort of contemporary words in Jesus's mouth that maybe will provoke people to think about stuff. So, sometimes I'll like adapt a quote from somebody. Sometimes it's a direct quote. Sometimes it's an idea that I have, and it's a really little space. So you kind of have to create this little, just this little idea that encapsulates something.
Sure.
And I just thought, that'd be a fun project to do, because I'm a big fan of the quote in general,
Yeah,
and
me
I like.
too.
I mean, the danger, of course, is that a quote is always essentially removed from its larger
Mm.
context, but it can also be a catalyst for thinking about something if you kind of get it the right way. So really, it was like a double play. It was a critique of the fact that everybody seems to think they're speaking for God, but
Yeah.
really, but really, we're speaking for ourselves,
Mm.
because regardless of whoever the person is, and they go, oh well, this is what Jesus said. Well, there's a difference between saying and meaning. There's no
Oh, yeah.
there's no. So it was just I, it was just a way of and I just like the idea that there was always this shut up,
Yes.
that was the so if you look at the thing, the response from the crowd is shut up, and I just thought that was just a funny little thing, so I just called it Situationist Jesus to kind of encapsulate the whole idea of the situationist movement, and then the whole idea of nobody listening to Jesus anyway, always saying shut up,
Shut
and
up.
yeah, and I think in our world, unless you're really, well, generally, unless people are sort of completely supportive of the way things are, we live in this era where we switch off anything that doesn't fit within our grid. So I figured it would,
Right.
uh, a lot of people would read it and just go, "Oh, shut up," you know what I mean?
Yeah.
anti-capitalist screed or a Freudian concept, or
Sure.
or sometimes or even a comment about religion. So I just sort of started to insert ideas around things that that interest me. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like it's the internet, so just make something and play around with it. So that was
Sure.
kind of. But I think the Situationists are a really interesting group of people, because they were very they themselves were kind of influenced by surrealism and the Dada movement, which were
Okay. Yeah.
kind of early 20th century art and poetry movements that were really trying to come to terms with the horrors of like the First World War and
Mm.
all of those kind of things, and really present the arts and language as means by which you could think differently about the world. And I
Sure.
actually came across, I think, one of the more interesting books that I've read about popular music is a book by Greil Marcus,
Mm.
who um, Greil Marcus used to be like a staff writer for Rolling Stone,
Okay.
and he was one of the first like rock journalists to kind of deal with popular music in an academic way. So very thoughtful, very reflective, and he teaches at universities and stuff now, which was
Okay.
not common back in the day when he started. And he's written definitive books about Dylan and Elvis Presley and stuff like that. And he wrote this book called Lipstick Traces,
Mm.
which is it's about the punk movement really, and it's about how the Situationists influenced some of the early people, particularly Malcolm McLaren, who helped found the Sex Pistols,
Mm-hmm.
deeply influenced by the Situationist International and their whole ideas. In fact, there's a story in there because before he came back to England and founded the Sex Pistols, he managed the New York Dolls for a while, which were a sort of seminal, New York kind of proto-punk rock band. And
Sure.
at one of their last shows, he hung a banner behind them that said "The politics of boredom."
Mm.
One of the comment that was a situationist statement that we one of the products, and it's interesting, one of the products of our world of passive entertainment is the the idea of what they called the politics of boredom. So their argument was that when we shifted from being leisure-minded people, or leisure-minded, as Americans might say,
I was like, what are you talking about?
entertainment-based, that
Sure.
we shifted from being active to passive. So
Mm.
entertainment is something that you experience. Leisure is something that you do.
Okay.
So the politics of boredom was a critique on contemporary culture that lulls people into a kind of passive state where they become consumers of objects and
Mm.
shift from being actively engaged in the world. And so that book, and I knew a little bit about the Situationists before because I'd read Du Bois' Society of the Spectacle, but that book sort of really opened it up, and I sort of went down, as you do, or at least as I do, yet another rabbit hole.
Oh man, I can't help but do it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm constantly falling into them.
Yeah, well, there's so much, I mean, you can't go down everyone, but there are things that sort of pique your interest. And I was always kind of fascinated with, I mean, I've been fascinated for a long time with the whole notion that it seems as though the general consensus is it's impossible to escape from capitalism as we experience it now.
Right.
And I mean, I'm not gonna, I'm not about to launch on some, anti-capitalist screed, but I do think that there's something incredibly nefarious about consumer capitalism as we're experiencing it, and as the last couple of years have unfolded, and I mean, it seems to me there's a huge problem when the wealth of the world is increasingly being captured amongst an increasingly smaller group of people. And
Yes.
the gap between rich and not rich is growing exponentially all the time.
Right.
We seem to have lost any kind of notion of middle class or stuff like that, but
Right.
people are still buying into the illusion that you can be that person, you can be the next billionaire and stuff like
Oh
that. And of course
yeah.
someone will be,
Mm.
but there's only room for so many billionaires.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
Absolutely.
the fact is, every time there's a billionaire, there are an awful lot of non-billionaire poor people who help that billionaire get there. But we live in this culture where it's like somehow a crowning achievement of solo success that someone's done this by themselves, and it's an impossible thing. So I, I liked the notion that was rampant amongst the situationists, the challenging the sort of the way media unfolds, and
Mm.
critiquing the sort of focus and generation of continual ongoing consumption. It just sort of interests me, like personally, but also theologically, socially, economically.
Yeah.
So I just sort of threw Situationist Jesus out there to see what would happen, and then he went away, and
No. Did he float up into the sky or
came back, descended from the clouds. I mean,
All right, the second coming is true. All right. So are you saying
second
this is
come.
is this the apocalypse then?
Oh, I think past the apocalypse now, aren't we?
Oh,
Nobody. I mean, now, people aren't thinking apocalypse these days. They're thinking extinction. I
oh,
mean,
isn't that the case? Wow.
I mean, maybe that's a different conversation, but I think it's remarkable um, that we've moved into a post-apocalyptic view,
Mm,
and now what people talk about is not an apocalyptic situation, but an extinction situation.
mm,
So, I mean, religious people still think apocalyptically because it's
sure.
part of the, or at least I think Christian religious people think that way, because that's very, very much a part of the sort of Christian view of things. But I think in the broader culture, people are like, no, 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 it's all going to end, and there'll be nothing
Right.
left. There'll be nature, but there won't be humans. I mean, that's a relatively new phenomenon.
Yeah. No, my 10-year-old daughter yesterday we were having dinner and she was talking about one of the science lessons she was learning and she was asking me, is it really all just gonna like burn up or freeze? And I'm like, it seems like it. It's and she was kind of terrified about that, but it's
Yeah.
something to wrestle with.
Well, it's like if you think about, Greta Thunberg, when she gave that speech that certain people sort of dismissed, when she sort of basically was crying and said, you've destroyed my future and stuff like that. I mean,
Right.
very definite sense amongst a growing number of people that there is no future for humanity unless something dramatically
Mm,
changes. I mean, it's very punk, it's very Johnny Rotten, no future.
mm,
But it's a very different phenomenon than 20 or 30 years ago. So,
sure.
well, so I'm sure Situationist Jesus will have some stuff to say about extinction soon.
Oh,
But
I bet he will. So two things that are coming up for me that I wanted to share when you were kind of riffing on the origins of the situationist Jesus. The first one was I was surprised that I got so into it because I think I've grown weary of all these, bite-size like quotes on Instagram where people reduce these complex ideas into like 5 steps, or that's why I like a long form podcast. It gives you a chance to have a deep conversation, but I don't see situations Jesus as reductionistic. I see it as really causing me to kind of think deeper, even though it's this short, pithy, almost I think of Heraclitus fragments. It's a little truth bomb that is difficult to understand. I think could mean so many different things, but I don't see it as reductionistic like so much of the shit on Instagram. So thank you for that.
yeah, well, yeah, well, I wasn't trying to make people. I wasn't trying to give people, some well-being hit
Right, right.
uh, or something to put on your fridge, because I think most put them on the fridge.
Although maybe I should start putting them on my fridge.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, situationist Jesus fridge magnets
Yeah.
would be.
Hey, we
Uh,
can make like stickers.
yeah, yeah, it's funny, but I don't know. What's really funny is people every once in a while send me things from other people who've sort of lifted the whole idea, and
Oh,
but
really?
don't go, oh, this person's doing this and they haven't credited you. And I'm like, yeah, well, whatever, I don't care. I mean, it's the whole point. It doesn't really matter anyway. I mean, I stole the idea. You know what I mean? I
There you
mean,
go. There you go.
I mean, as Picasso said, good artists borrow, great artists steal.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I love
Yeah,
that.
I stole the whole idea from the situationist who doctored up cartoons, and
Yes.
that's where it came from. But yeah, I mean, I don't I those kind of thought for the day kind of things, they always leave me cold, and I think
Mm.
in some ways I stopped for a while because I was worried that it was going to become, although I'm never that positive. So
Okay, that's good. That's maybe one of the things I like about you. I'm pretty negative myself too. So
I'm a nihilistic optimist. So
oh, there you go. Okay, I mean, we may have to come back to that. I like that. But okay, so the other thing that I was thinking, I don't know if you're familiar with, he's a contemporary liberationist theologian, Miguel de la Torre. I don't know if you're familiar
yeah,
with his work at all. So, and I know he's Cuban. I'm originally from Puerto Rico, so one of our favorite words is joder, which in Spanish means to kind of fuck with. And he
uh,
talks about an ethics para joder, which is a way of like trying to resist, the capitalism or the system as a way of
yeah,
like fucking with it a little bit. And
yeah,
I kind of see Situationist Jesus as embodying that ethics para joder. You're just kind of fucking with things. It's not super clear, like, and even maybe like the original Situationist, they would stick the comics back into like the shelves or whatever to kind of get
yeah.
people to be shocked by it.
Yeah, I mean, because I think one of the interesting things about them is they were aware that media, and they started in 1956 or 57, so television is just getting going, but it's not
Yeah,
the dominant thing. So sort of comic books and cultural artifacts, but media artifacts were very much part of their sort of MO.
sure.
And which is why I think it's kind of funny when you're on a platform critiquing a platform. You know,
Yeah.
some people
Oh
would
yeah.
go, some people would go, oh well, that's duplicitous or hypocritical, or stuff like that. From a situationist perspective, it's the only environment that you can do it, because you're actually
Mm,
you're using the medium that you feel is the the channel of a social conditioning that you want to react to, against, or critique or respond to. So
yes.
would you go but that
Right.
that environment? And I think that's what's interesting. The challenge, of course, is you can't force an audience. So,
Mm.
and given the way social media seems to have gone, we all pretty much pick the things that we like and don't expose ourselves to too much that we don't. You know what I mean? That's the
Yeah.
side and the downside of the current social situation with media. You can pick any, you know, if you're on the far right, you can pick a far right thing and you don't have to listen to the far left and vice versa. You know what
Sure.
I mean?
Of
And
course.
although, I
I'm
think
I'm really I'm
everybody's,
really convicted about that. I mean, just personally, I've wanted to start moving in a direction of being at least more exposed to more views and more perspectives, even those I don't disagree with for this very reason. I'm curious where you're at with that. I mean, do you have any
well, I've
practices or
always,
how do you think about that kind of not just
always,
getting lost in your silo?
yeah, well, I've always tried to practice what I call listening to your enemies.
Mm,
For a long time, I taught theology at a pretty conservative school, the ethos of which was not particularly mine on many levels, and as time went on, less and less. Um, and so I've always tried to make a point of going, well, this is what I think, but I also know that I've changed an awful lot over the years in how I think. But it's always good to think about a counter. So you think this, and there are a whole bunch of people that think the exact opposite. Well, they've got to be worth a read. I remember once I was actually teaching this class on theology and culture.
mm,
And the premise that I was operating on, I sort of broken it down into different aspects of, Western cultural. It was largely about Western culture because we were in the West, you know what I mean?
sure, sure.
So, um, but what I did was I with every lecture, depending on the subject, I'd go, well, if we're gonna talk about the human self, then we have to talk about that after Freud,
Mm,
because much of the language that we use when we discuss the self, the human being and stuff, particularly when we get into the brain and the mind and stuff, it there's a lot of Freudian influence.
sure.
We talk about the unconscious. Well, yes, there were other people that talked about that, but it was Freud that kind of generalized the term, or the ego, or the id, or
Right.
that. You know what I mean? And so people talk about those things, and so I sort of went through and I said, so if we're going to talk about human sexuality, we've got to talk about the invention of the contraceptive pill, and all of these kind of things. So in this one class, we were talking about the world and about nature, and so I said, well, if we're going to talk about the world and we're going to talk about nature, then we've got to take Darwin into account. Now, this is a theological school,
Sure.
and it was quite a large class, and there's always one, or at least one, and there was this one person who was just not happy
Mm,
with this whole idea, and went on this big rant about what was wrong with evolution and blah blah blah, and why accept it and what was wrong with the theory, and oh, and by the way, I'd qualified it and saying, I'm not saying you have to agree with any of these people.
sure.
You just have to acknowledge that we're having a conversation after this series of ideas have come into play, and we have to take into account those major shifts in conceptual
Mm,
thinking in order to think about and to acknowledge A, where we are, perhaps B, where we've come from, and C, where we might be going with this, you know. So so this guy is having a rant, blah blah blah, and having a go at me for bringing evolutionary blah blah blah. And I was like, well, fair enough. I said, but have you read On the Origin of the
Mm,
Species? And that was the response.
mm,
Crickets. So then I said, has anybody in the class read On the Origin of the Species, where, Darwin sort of lays out his ideas? In fact, has anybody read Darwin ever? And there was probably, I don't know, 60 people in the class. Not one person had read it, but everybody had an opinion about it.
wow.
And I was like, here's the deal. I wouldn't recommend reading On the Origin of the Species. Actually, it's a really hard read. You know what I mean? And I said that because I actually, when I was doing this, it was the 100th anniversary of the publication of that, and
Okay.
I had this really cool version of On the Origin of the Species with a cover by Damien Hirst, who was an artist that I liked. So
Mm,
um, I was like, I bought this again mainly for the cover because I've read it, but I don't, and I'm not like a huge sort of, sadly, a huge science person. My brain. But anyway, my point was, it's always worth knowing what the argument is from another side.
mm,
You may not like it, you may not agree with it, you may not even want to know that somebody thinks that, but it's probably worth listening.
mm.
But I would also, I would also say that I don't waste time with idiots on the internet who
Yeah.
who just blab their screedal bullshit.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely willing to go. I mean, my politics leans left, but I always try and listen to people who are thoughtful with
Mm,
other positions to try and
sure.
work out. And I may not understand it, and I usually don't agree with it, but I think I've learned enough in life to know that there's always something to learn from somebody, even who's at the opposite end of the spectrum
Yeah.
to you.
That's so good.
But it's hard. It's hard in the siloed world of the internet. Like, I mean, I do find like the and here's the other thing as well. The thing, even though there's text in Situationist Jesus, the thing I like about Instagram, and the
Okay.
thing that I sort of been as a loss of Instagram, is I like the fact that Instagram was initially, first and foremost, a visual medium,
Okay.
not a textual one. And I find that the textual media, like Twitter and
Hmm.
Facebook, are much more problematic for me in terms of what goes on there. It's kind of ugly. You know what I mean? There's a lot of ugliness in those environments that I just think,
Yeah. So
especially
can you
especially
talk
on
to
Twitter,
that? Why
especially
you think that is?
well, anonymity helps. You can hide behind your anonymous name. And a lot of people do that. You know what I
Sure.
mean? Because if you're not going to be, it's like the KKK. They weren't riding around burning crosses in people's yards without a mask on,
Right.
because the mask allows you to hide behind something. You know what I mean?
Oh
It's
yeah.
it's both a revelation and a secreting. But and I think, like, on Twitter, a lot of people hide behind the wall that's built up by having this avatar persona that
Sure.
allows you a degree of distance, so you can just, like, hurl your stone and then leave without
Right.
recompense. And I think that, given the fact that there seems to be very little etiquette around this stuff. I mean, and part of the problem is, we embraced all of these things without critical reflection, which happens all the time. You
Mm.
know, I don't ever recall. In fact, there was in the newspaper yesterday, there was an article about, because I think yesterday it was the 50th anniversary of the invention of the mobile phone.
Oh, wow.
And the guy who invented it in New York, still alive, he's quite old now, but they were he was talking about, because he went outside some building in New York and made a call, you know what I mean? And it was obviously a revolutionizing thing that they actually didn't realize was going to revolutionize the world in the way that it did. You know what I mean? And of
Sure.
course, in the last 50 years since then, we've come an awful long way with
Yeah.
regard to mobility. But I don't recall anywhere along the way going, here's here's this new device. It's going to liberate you from the obligation or the tyranny of a landline.
Mm.
You'll be able to have a conversation everywhere, but you're now going to be distracted by people walking down the street, wobbling from side to side while they look at stuff. So it's going to make walking on streets more
Right.
complicated. You're going to hear people arguing because they think they're private
Mm.
and they're having a private conversation in a public environment, so and there was no sort of code of ethics with it.
Mm.
It's like when when you used to have a landline, people used to go, hello, this is blah blah blah, and give their number and stuff, because there was a requirement with it. Now you sort of who's calling you because their
Right.
name or their number comes up, and you just launch into a conversation. It can be anywhere at any time.
Mm.
And I do think that there's like a social disruption that's come from that.
Mm.
And there's been the critical reflection about technology usually comes after the technology, because we
Okay.
we never know what the potential of a technology is, positively and negatively.
Mm.
When they first wired New York for electricity, it was for light.
Mm.
So that's why because there weren't any indoor appliances, so they didn't exist, because the capacity to make things, with electricity and stuff hadn't been invented. So houses were wired for light.
Yeah.
So if you've ever been to like Disneyland, but they used to have that, like, I don't know, maybe they still do, but it's like on Main Street when you go in, it's one of those theater things. And I think it's like Abraham Lincoln talking
Mm.
in a chair or something, and it sort of all moves around, and, it's kind of all about the future and stuff. But at one point, you're in this room, and there are things that, and the cables are going up into the ceiling. And that's because when houses didn't have plug sockets.
Mm.
So the first thing they did was and I remember this actually. I mean, I was too young to experience it, but I
Sure.
remember that they had these new things where you could literally plug something in, but you had to plug it into the light fixture. That's where the electricity was. That's why
Gotcha.
into old houses there aren't very many sockets.
Mm.
There wasn't that much, need or use for electricity. So they were like, oh, electricity, it's light. That's the single use. Well, then suddenly goes, you can make a fan with this and cool the room down. And I think that was the first home appliance was a fan.
Mm.
So there's always this cumulative, we think we know everything, but we don't.
But we don't.
And we think we know the horizon of something's possibility, and we seldom factor in the negative possibilities
Mm,
because we get enthralled with the potential, the utopian liberation of the particular artifact.
yeah.
So, and that's obviously, you're not going to sell, and selling would be the operative word. You're not going to sell someone uh, uh, a mobile device and say this is going to ruin you because now you're going to be forced to answer every call. You're going to get text messages all day and all night. You're going to have 27,000 emails that you haven't opened. You're going to feel the tyranny of working when you go to work, on your way to work. Because
Right.
you think about mobile phones. Um, People started getting calls from work on their way to work. Well, brilliant. But you didn't get paid for the extra hour that you were trying to
Right.
while you were working. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. That's a great point.
And so there are always those. I don't even know how we got off on this tangent, but so I think with oh I know with social media and stuff like that, uh,
Yes.
nobody really expected. I mean, if you read the guys that started Twitter,
Right.
140 characters. That's what I'm doing today. Instagram. I'm just going to post a picture.
Sure.
Post one picture. That was the whole deal with Instagram. Just post a picture. And they only you could only do square. And I love that actually. I loved the
Hmm.
fact that you could only make it. And I'm not like old school. I get it, but I must admit I find it a little irritating that you've got reels,
Hmm.
stories, all of this stuff on Instagram now. There's a part of me that wishes they'd have like an old school Instagram account. Only make square, and maybe they do. I don't know. Where you could only post square things, but still, I
Hmm.
most of the time I still just post square pictures. I kind of like it. I
Hmm.
just like the whole idea. And the other thing is, it's like you post these things and you post it, I think, in some ways, well, I can only speak for myself. I seldom tag things or hashtag things. Every once in a while I do now. Um, I never used to like anything either.
Okay.
Not because I didn't like it. I just didn't want to get into the whole mechanism of that because I think again there's a tyranny that comes with that. How do I
Oh,
get more?
yeah.
How do I get more likes? Well, you know, don't worry about how many likes you get. I put stuff on Instagram. I view it like I do a lot of stuff. I mean, I keep really extensive journals. I have
Hmm.
books that I write quotes in. I make a collage every day, and I keep a visual diary. And actually, my Instagram is first and foremost my own personal visual diary. I post on there for me. I actually
Wonderful.
don't give a shit if anybody looks at it. I mean, I really don't. I can say that quite honestly.
Gotcha.
I really don't. I don't. Half the time, I don't know. Every once in a while, I go, how many followers have I got? Or you
Sure.
see someone that follows you, and it's like, oh, who is that? And oh, I've got this many followers or something. That's why I was so surprised when I brought back Situationist Jesus. I mean, I think I got like 150 new followers in one day.
Wow.
And the only reason I know that is because when I looked the next day, there were all these like people, and I was like, what is that about? You know what I mean? It's died down since then. So that was the initial rush,
Sure,
but
sure.
but I don't care. It doesn't matter to me because for me, it's just I'm putting it out there,
Yeah.
and it's not up to me to try. There's this, which again it goes back to this consumerist mentality that the situationists were trying to address, which is in a consumer economy, we all become products.
Mm.
Therefore, we all become victims of the need to sell our own product, to sell ourselves. And none of us are exempt from that. So I'm not excluding
Sure.
myself. You know,
Sure.
I know that presentation is everything, but it comes with some heavy emotional weight, I think,
Yes.
that we're not really equipped to handle.
Mm.
You see it a lot with young people who get really, I mean,
Barry, I live
kids.
it. As a therapist who works with a lot of adolescents, I just can't agree more with what you're saying. The tremendous emotional cost.
I mean, it's bad enough, it's bad enough when you were like 14 and girls in your class made fun of you because you had like zits or something,
Right, right.
or, or vice versa. But when it's the entire sort of internet,
Oh
making,
yeah.
and I mean, here's another. I guess this is me and my pet peeves now. No, it's actually not a pet peeve. It's an observation. Um, we live, I think, essentially in a judgment culture
Mm.
because we live in a world riddled with reality shows which are all asking us to pass judgment.
Got you.
X Factor, Celebrity this, Survivor, vote for who you think should be on this week, and we're invited to make judgments all the time, completely abstractly,
Mm.
because who's to say? But I think it extends beyond that. I think it creates this thing where we all pass opinions, we all make judgments, and I know we've always made judgments as human beings, but it gets accelerated and exaggerated by the potential of an environment where we're sharing in this momentum that we can load judgment onto someone
Yes.
arbitrarily and often anonymously and do sometimes harm.
Oh man. I just
And
couldn't
I
agree
and
more.
I worry about those things. I worry, you know, on one level, I can always go, oh yes, they're just game shows, But I also, nothing is ever just something.
Right. Exactly.
There's always a ramification because they do shape our thinking and our perspective, and we're passing judgment on everything all the time. You
And
know,
isn't that the nature of like human subjectivity too? This is where I get frustrated with some of the reductionists and certain views that are a little bit maybe too reductionistic in terms of science is the human is never just, this or that. There's always that excess. There's what it could be. And that
I mean,
often comes at a cost.
yeah, we're complex. We're complex, complicated, contradictory beings
Yes.
are a mix of I mean, I swing between Nick Cave's people ain't no good and no, there's good in people like every day.
Yeah.
You meet enough assholes in one day and you can definitely fall on the side of
Oh
Jesus.
yeah.
Is there anybody a decent human being?
Mm.
And where's kindness?
Yes. Yes.
Where's general? And I know, I mean, I know that there is kindness and stuff like that, but not we don't. There are things that we don't value and prize in the way that we should.
Mm.
I when it comes to how we manage what it means to be a human in the world, in community, in society.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh, absolutely.
I say that I include myself in that. It's not me pointing out what's wrong with other people. It's I always figure that the most fingers are pointing back at you. When you're
Yeah.
pointing at somebody else. So I'm aware of my own complicity.
Sure. Well,
I'm
I
as
remember what you said the first time I spoke with you on the podcast. You said, your goal every day is to be a little bit less of an asshole.
yeah.
And,
And
that resonated
some
with
days,
me.
yeah, some days I feel like I might have done that, and other days I'm like, nah, actually lost that one today.
Didn't
Some
meet
days
that goal.
some days you intentionally lose it. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, I'm just feeling like I'm going to be an asshole today, and I'm putting that in. Don't know why, but that's how we are. Um, and yeah, I don't know.
So Barry, could we transition into this whole topic of like radical theology? When we were reconnecting and messaging on Instagram, you said something about maybe being a part of a program that's going to focus on that. I'm just curious what you could
Yeah.
tell us about that.
Well, so I work with a group called GCAS, which is the Global Center for Advanced Studies. It's
Okay.
a friend of mine. It's almost 10 years old now, and it began as another way of offering um, higher education, degreed education, uh,
Okay.
but in a more collaborative and ultimately debt-free way.
Mm,
And it
that sounds
exists,
nice.
and largely it's online, but also on the ground in terms of seminars and sessions and stuff like
Oh,
that.
cool.
And it's essentially made up of three components. So there's a philosophical element, there's a psychoanalytic element, and there's a theological element.
Okay.
And they all, to some degree, exchange with each other. But you could, so you can, and it's accredited through the EU, so it's based in Dublin.
Okay.
So it's a legit degree and it's accredited through the EU. It's the same as going to any other school and getting a BA or an MA or a PhD.
Okay.
And there are a growing number of degree programs that are accredited. And so I am apparently no, not apparently, but I'm the director of the Radical Theology MA program,
Okay.
and it's in the process of finalizing the accreditation right now. It's we're waiting until it's that all the paperwork is signed off on it,
Sure.
and it should be not a problem because we've done all the stuff that we need to do. It just has to go through the mill, you know,
Right. Right.
all of the logistical organizational stuff, and it's going to be a an MA program that focuses on radical theology specifically. So we have a pretty good set of people who are going to contribute to the program. So John Caputo's gonna teach. I think God, Pete Rollins is going to be teaching. We've got there'll be philosophical. So basically, it's an MA in radical. It's an MA with an emphasis in radical theology.
Okay.
Radical theology is about an entirely novel way of engaging with religion and Christianity in particular, but also with the world.
Okay.
There'll be a opportunity for radical theology and psychoanalytic
Sure.
connections. So Jameson Webster's going to be doing a component. There'll also be a philosophical bent. So if you're doing a philosophical degree, but you want to do a little bit of radical theology, you can.
Yeah. Oh man, that sounds so exciting.
And it's really doable. It's really inexpensive, and at the end of it, everybody who goes through GCAS becomes essentially an owner of GCAS at the end.
Okay.
There's a component that's connected to cryptocurrency, about which I know shit.
Okay, and I know even less.
So I don't, it's not as simple as like you get an NFT, but you
Okay,
get
okay.
you get an opportunity to own part of GCAS through
Interesting.
NFT cryptocurrency kind of
Yeah.
thing. But basically, um, it's an incredibly inexpensive way to expose yourself to an international community of people, because there are students from all over the world that are involved.
Okay.
There's a whole Latin American
Mm.
part of the podcast where everything's done in Spanish,
Oh, wow.
based in Buenos Aires. So there's a whole Latin American contingent. There's a European thing. There are Americans. This summer, there's going to be a summer institute in Prague,
Mm.
2 weeks.
Oh, very cool.
In May, there's a 2-day seminar with Bruce Fink,
Oh,
who
yeah.
is one of the foremost Lacanian writers and psychoanalysts around.
Sure.
So there are really fascinating interest. Zizek is going to be involved
Oh,
in
wow.
the radical theology program at some point. So, we've got some really interesting people lined up, and we've got the program laid out. And it's really the other thing is, unlike perhaps a more traditional school where the program is set, there are things that you have to take, obviously,
Sure.
because otherwise you can't get a degree if you only do cartoon drawing. You don't get a degree if you're doing pencil sketching. So there are classes that you have to take, but um, it's done in a cohort. So you do a lot of work with the people that are in the program with you,
Okay.
but it's also independent. So everybody works independently with a mentor,
Mm.
and you write a thesis. And so it's radical theology is an umbrella, I think. And under that umbrella, there are lots of different like pockets, and everybody we sort of help everybody work out how best to do what it is they want to do. So
Okay.
it's not come and take our program and do our thing. It's
Right.
come tell us what you want to
Mm.
study, and we'll help you make that happen.
Okay. Oh, I like
So
that.
if you want to, so it's not all radical theology. That's all about Zizek and Lack.
Sure.
Well, that's one arena of radical theology, but not all radical theology is Zizekian,
Right.
or Lacanian. You know what I mean. So
Sure.
there are people who like Deleuze, not Lacan, when it comes to the void and the lack. You know what I mean.
Sure.
So that's or maybe you're interested in mysticism, and Bataille or something like that. So
Hmm.
and some of these classes I've already taught and have been taught as well. So people can look online and see what's there, and there's a lot of free stuff that you can be exposed to as well. So anyway,
Sure.
that's that. So that's the
Yeah, that's great. So Barry, one of the things I'm curious about is if you could speak to this in terms of that big umbrella of radical theology. So there's these various pockets.
yeah.
Is there one pocket that you resonate with the most that you've thought about and that kind of energizes you?
Well, I mean, the one thing I will say is that uh, there are lots of things that now get called radical theology, and I'm not sure that they necessarily are particularly.
Okay.
It's a bit like that whole deconstruction deconstructionist Christianity thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have no problem with it whatsoever, other than I don't think it's actually deconstruction as I understand it philosophically.
Got you.
I think it's a dismantling of a belief system, and then an attempt to reframe it. So people are all the
Yeah.
time. Now, enough of the deconstruction. Now we got to reconstruct. Well, yes and no, I would say. You know what I
Mm.
mean?
Oh
So,
yeah.
there are lots of terms that get thrown around. So, my sort of introduction into radical theology came initially, I think, through probably uh, Zizek and maybe John Caputo. You
Mm.
know what I mean?
Sure.
But I'm really interested. Although actually that's not true. My real interest in radical theology emerged through Mark Taylor, who many
Okay.
people say is more of a postmodern theologian. You know, blah blah blah.
Right.
You
Right.
know, you get all the weeds about it. I'm very interested on the conversation between theology and the world in which we live.
Okay.
And I'm interested in what theology has to say about the lived experience.
Yes.
For me, radical theology is a radical re-engagement with all of life,
Mm.
and it's not just about concepts and and theories. It's not, for me. Radical theology is not liberation theology. It's something else, because liberation theology has a starting point. Now,
Sure.
you can see liberation theology as a radical reinvention of Christianity, but the starting point for radical theology is the preferential option for the poor in the Gospels, right?
Mm.
That's essentially the nut around
Right.
which. Well, of course, I don't disagree with that, but I think radical theology is looking at something a bit more expansive than a particular issue like that. You know what I
Got
mean?
you. Yeah. I mean, so would you say radical theology has a starting point in your understanding
Yeah,
of
I
it?
would say that the starting point for radical theology is that everything is up for grabs, and
Mm.
everything that you thought probably needs to be thought again. So it's radical in that it's going down literally to the roots,
Yeah.
and then interrogating both the existing the existing plant, but then also growing in new directions. So for me, radical theology is moving towards new horizons, not just the reinvention of old horizons.
Mm.
So I'm not interested in, generally, like, this is just me personally.
Sure. Sure.
There are lots of things that I'm not interested in talking about when it comes to theology. They're inconsequential to me. You know, I and I don't feel that radical theology needs to go back. And so, what's a radical theology, opinion of the atonement?
Yeah. I'm not interested in that question.
You know, no, I'm not saying that you couldn't have a radical theology of the atonement, but I would want to drill down a little deeper than that
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
ask some some questions before you got there
Sure.
about
Sure.
uh, where things are heading. So for me, radical, it's like, I mean, you'd think I'd be more concise and more precise, but there's a vagary to it,
No, there
because
is, I think.
I think because it's very easy to break things down into a concept or a construct or an idea or a theory. But
Right.
radical theology, I think, is an ongoing conversation with life.
Oh man, that resonates with me.
And there are components in there, of course, that are related to conceptions of the sacred and the divine and God and stuff like that. But those aren't necessarily the trajectories of where radical theology is necessarily headed.
Mm.
It's like, I remember I really like, one of the things that I liked about Mark Taylor when I first came across him is that he's been very involved in writing about, things like art and architecture and sculpture and things like that. And
Sure.
there was a point where a lot of people said that sort of Mark Taylor had kind of given up on theology.
Mm.
But he made a comment that has never left me. He said, religion is the most interesting where it's the least obvious.
Wow.
And I understood what he meant by that, because when people thought that he'd given up the conversation because suddenly he was talking about the architecture of Las Vegas, or he was talking about, Richard Serra's sculptures,
Mm.
or things like that, he was actually taking theology, or actually discovering where theology was the most interesting because it was the least obvious. And I think at the heart of radical theology for me is that voyage of discovery,
Yeah.
that sense in which, oh, no, that actually, it's like I'm quite interested in fashion because I think it's a site of the sacred,
Yes.
and I think it's religious in
Mm.
a sense that in a very obfuscated, opaque way.
Mm.
Not just to have a theology of fashion, but to theologize through fashion.
Yeah.
That's a radical theology conversation, I would say,
Mm.
and that may sound like semantics, but
No.
because one is a theory about, and another is a theory out of,
Mm.
and um, so
So can
that's
I
kind
ask
of
you
the
this? Can I ask you this? Like maybe as a final kind of question, because I know I have
sure.
to go in just a little bit. I'll have a client to see. Could you give us a radical theology of shoes? Because I think this is an area where you and I connect. I have so many more shoes than my wife, and she loves fashion and loves shoes, but I don't even know how many pairs I have. I fucking love shoes, and I think
Yeah,
deeply about them.
and I have very fixed opinions about. Well, I say I have fixed opinions. So for a long time, for a long time, I've had this real thing about, uh, square-toed shoes.
I remember you writing about that. Yeah,
No square-toed shoes. And what I realized is it's '90s square-toed shoes that I'm against,
there you go.
because there are some newer square-toed shoes coming out that are kind of interesting, but they're not really square-toed shoes.
Fair.
There's a difference to them. Like, so, but they're, to me, I mean, shoes are fascinating because they say so much. Like, I am just not into like Crocs,
Oh God.
and flip flops, and I know people are, and like those like, I don't know, I go look in, like there's a couple of really expensive department stores in London, where there's a lot of fashion stores, and sometimes I go and I look at these like ultra futuristic designer sort of sneakers that almost look like, I don't know what they look like. They look like spaceships on your feet.
Yeah, yeah.
They've got diamond things hanging off them, and big, and they make your feet look this big. It's like those, those like those red cartoon boots that were big. There's a meme going around about them at the moment.
Yes, yes.
People wearing, I forget who makes them, you know what I mean? But at first I thought it was a joke, but then I realized, oh, no, no, no. Somebody's actually made
It's a
this, and
thing. Yeah.
it's a real thing. And so I'm looking at this and I'm going, okay, so there are lots of ways to think about this. A cartoon feet. What's that saying about us as human beings? Well, I think it's saying something about the collapsing of the human
Mm,
into virtual. the cartoonizing of the human being. You know,
Mm.
you think about, and then you can sort of go out from there, and you can start to think about plastic surgery and facial reconstruction and the filters on Instagram
On Instagram, yeah.
that take that make you look like you're robotic or not human or
Right.
younger, older, and CI generation and stuff like that. And so there's this movement, this collapsing of boundaries between the invented world of cartoons and figures and creatures and all that stuff, and who we are as human beings. And we talk a lot about um, AI and how we're all being drawn into the world of AI online. But
Yes.
there's also a reciprocal move outside, where the outside world is starting to look a bit like the AI world as well.
Yeah.
So, when you see those crazy shoes, on one level, it speaks of the fact that shoes are no longer just about function.
Mm.
That's what they used to be. They used to be protectors. You know what I mean?
Oh
And then
yeah.
and then and they've always been. I mean, my dad, he had his work boots, his best shoes that he only wore like weddings and funerals,
Sure.
and had them his whole sort of adult life, and then his everyday shoes that he wore when he went out down to the pub and stuff like that.
Sure.
And every once in a while, I fantasize that I too could live with three pairs of shoes, but
That
but
ain't
then
fucking happening for me.
not happening. It's just not happening. Even though I mean, I said to somebody the other week, in some ways, it's really good that I'm not rich, because I'd be terrible. Because I see three or four pairs of shoes a day that I want. you
Oh
know.
man.
But anyway, I don't know if that really answers your question, but I do think, I mean, I think how we adorn ourselves and what we do with you know with fabric. What's that quote? There's a quote I read. I better find it. Hold on a second. I wrote it down. Um, oh, this was this woman named Isabella Ducrot. She said this:
Mm.
fabric is the companion of the human being.
Oh,
So she was talking. This is a woman who like makes fabrics and collects fabrics, and she does art with fabrics and stuff like that, and weaving and all those kind of things,
sure.
and basically saying that one of the closest companions that we have as human beings are the fabrics that we wear.
Oh, it's so good.
You think about what you wrap around your feet. You know, shoes used to be sort of protective, and they still are to some degree.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, wearing these kind of foamy shoes that you sink into, that are all about comfort,
Right.
all about kind of futuristic style. They have no utilitarian, other than they stop you from walking barefoot,
Yeah.
but their utility is minimal. You're not going to go to work in a pair of Yeezys, are you? And in a factory, you're going to break your foot in the first 5 minutes.
Right.
It's like, I mean, this is a tangent, but it's like, I remember when I was a kid, uh, the soccer boots, were made of leather, and they had these like screw-in studs and all that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
some of them even were like ankle boots, almost like real. And now soccer boots they're lightweight and they're knit,
Yeah.
and they weigh nothing. But you think of all the footballers that get foot injuries all the time. And you got to wonder if there's not a correlation between the vulnerability of the foot, even though the ball is, the football is lighter now, and
Sure.
all those things, but there's an exposure.
Mm.
There's no doubt that, I mean, knit trainers are really comfortable. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
our feet take a battering in life. So I understand the desire for comfort, but you also lose support when you wear those plastic shoes and stuff. And there's a lot of talk about, how damaging some of those cheaper rubbery shoes can be.
Sure, sure.
So there's a there's some theology to think about.
That's fucking amazing. I love it.
I'm still going to say 99% of the time, no square-toed shoes.
Got it. I can definitely like vouch for that and sign off on that.
And have you seen there's a new Gucci loafer,
I
and
haven't seen it.
it's got the toe. It's not round. It's not pointed. It's like curved like a wave.
Oh, interesting.
The jury is out for me on that.
Okay, I'm
As
gonna have to look at those.
as the jury is out for me on those Margiela shoes with the big toe that's separate from the rest of the foot.
Yeah.
Uh, you know. I wonder. Anyway,
So,
I'll
so
let you
Barry, would you mind just ending with the line of the podcast, which is just saying, continue the conversation?
continue the conversation.